Thanks everybody for joining us on the Project Censored radio show. We have a special program today for the International Women's Day. And our first guest here is Afeni Evans, who is an organizer based out of DC. She's also a Movement Black Lives Electoral Justice table member and a content creator. Afeni, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, very excited to have you. Folks might have seen Afeni's work on Facts and Fire on Instagram that gets shared pretty widely with Afeni just, telling like it is. And that is one of the primary reasons that I wanted to have you here today. March 8th is International Women's Day. And I purposely put a little stank on that when I say it. And while many will and do celebrate it by lifting up the voices and struggles of revolutionary women, it's also a very co-opted holiday. A day to uphold a patriarchal white supremacist capitalist system vis-a-vis girl bosses and glass ceiling smashers who make it to vice president or to sit on the board of Lockheed Martin, etc. So I wanna pull at these frayed edges of co-optation by discussing a personal connection to feminism, both so-called white feminism and the revolutionary feminism seeking to build a true liberation. And so I want to start by defining white feminism, and I'm pulling here from the book White Feminism by Koa Beck, where she writes, white feminism is an ideology. It's a type of feminism that takes up the politics of power without questioning them. By replicating patterns of white supremacy, capitalistic greed, corporate ascension, inhumane labor practices, and exploitation, and deems it empowering for women to practice these tenets as men always have. And it can be practiced by anyone of any race, background, allegiance, identity, or affiliation. White feminism is a state of mind. So, Afeni, with all of that, I'd like to start with how you've specifically encountered white feminism as not only a Black woman, but as a Black woman who pushes for revolutionary liberation.
Um, I think white women have a very specific way of like being and existing in movement spaces. Not all of the white women I've like come across, but a good majority of them. Especially considering that many of them come through like the lens of, like abortion rights or climate justice or any of these like other like very serious and very like real crises, but that can also be divorced from like racism or even class sometimes, depending on like what you're talking about. And I would also say that the parts of the climate movement are very elitist yeah, as well. A lot of what people are saying that you could do individually for climate. Anyway, that's the point. What I'm saying is I think white women, because they come in the movement through these different like lanes, they don't necessarily have an either desire sometimes or the language or the cultural understanding to be in spaces that are multicultural, and to understand that to be in a movement space is it to be in a space with a bunch of intersecting identities. And those identities, based on what they are, can create interlocking oppressions um, that differ from any one of our individual experiences, right? Um, and me personally, like I have always organized in majority Black, if not all Black spaces. Like organizationally, I've always worked for all Black orgs, work for Black women. But I do know that overall in the movement, because of white women's positioning as white women, whiteness being a socio-political um, system, not just a skin color, but something that you do have to buy into and actively uphold in order to be a part of it. White women forget that while they're in this space, they are still upholding white supremacy. And they think that because they are doing like good work, whether that be abortion work, climate work. Some of these people even do criminal justice and like prison abolition work. They think that because they're doing good work that it absolves them from actually having to divest from that system of socio-political whiteness. Um, so yeah, like I don't be around the white girlies too much. I'm not gonna lie. Me personally, just not really my bag. Love them. Love the girls that are doing the class conscious work over there. Love them, and I want them to organize their people. And the white women that I am in community with that we continue to like lock in and be in like real relationship. Y'all know who y'all are. You feel me? But yeah.
That's fair. Well, and you said something that I think is interesting, and I think it also feels like vague and not like people can't think of how to attain that. You said divest from the socio-political system of whiteness. What is that like? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I see whiteness and like, other people who are a lot smarter than me have seen whiteness as a commodity. There is a history of different groups of white people buying into, quite literally buying into being white because they knew that whiteness would come with a certain level of privilege. It comes with a certain level of socioeconomic access. And I would say that because whiteness is a sociopolitical system, many of the people that think they're white are very much not. Because whiteness is actually being able to control the financial and the war powers of this country. And if you don't have that, you may be white in skin color. You might be a little pale, but you definitely not the type of white that they're looking for up at the top. You feel me? So I think that that's also why, it's so interesting to be in space with white women who are organizing in this space because they don't see whiteness as a socio-political system. Of course, many of you don't see whiteness as socio-political system. We have been taught, conditioned, to see whiteness as we see all other races. But because of the power dynamic that white people have stolen through stealing the resources, stealing the people, stealing the land, um, because they have stolen that power and they have also set the meaning and shaped the conditions of what it means to live in the society, because the people that are shaping the meaning, and setting the agenda, the long-term agenda, the 50-year agenda of this country are white. Um, we have to see whiteness as what it is, which is that system. And divesting from that system means directly challenging the war power. It means directly challenging the financial power. It also means examining what your role is in this system of whiteness. How are you upholding whiteness every day in your life? How are you talking to your family members who uphold whiteness? Like, and even if you don't want to be like that white cousin that's talking about, I don't know, the black people at the cookout, you could be that white cousin that's talking about the opioid epidemic and talking about how the very same people who are pushing these opioids into your communities are the very same people that are incarcerated, that are praying for these private prisons that are incarcerating black people. Now, if you want to start there, maybe that might be a better place to start. I don't know. To say that you are divesting from whiteness is to be an active participant and a co-conspirator in the destruction of the white identity and, in turn, the capitalist and American identity.
Yeah, that's very well put. And I think one of the things that you're really saying here is something that Sarah Ahmed put. She wrote, quote, "To talk about racism within feminism is to get in the way of feminist happiness. And if talking about racism within feminism gets in the way of feminist happiness, we need to get in the way of feminist happiness," end quote. And I want to kind of pick at that a little bit more and talk about those intersecting identities that you've talked about and why we can't just focus on, oh, but hey, we're all women. Um, and I want to get it into later how that's also a problematic sentence for some people. Hey, we're all women. We can't just say that, but that people are complete human beings with a lot of different places on that spectrum of oppression beneath the U.S. empire. So could you talk a little bit about that and those intersecting identities that, quote unquote, get in the way of feminist happiness?
Yeah, I think that a really great example of that is when we look at I think it was second wave feminist movement, in the 1970s. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tail, because sometimes I be getting generations mixed up. But yeah, the second wave, I think it's the second wave in the 1970s. And black women were being sterilized. okay, we were being forcibly sterilized in hospitals. There were Black women that wanted to talk about that at some of the national conferences that these feminists were holding, and they were silenced. That right there is one example of the culture of white feminism that has been, again, because it is still centered around keeping that white privilege, whether that be financial privilege, whether that be access to a white man who has access to the war power, who has access to people who are at the helm of the military might of this country. These women are valuing that commodity of whiteness more than they're actually valuing the real experiences of Black women who are being sterilized in the South and in the Bible Belt. And regardless of whether or not it seemed to be um contradictory to a pro abortion messaging, it's not that it's contradictory. It's all, if we're going to say that we are pro-choice, we have to be pro-choice all the way around. It is a Black woman's choice to have a baby if she chooses to, just like it is any woman's choice, any birthing person's choice, any person with a birthing body's choice to have an abortion. It is the very, we have to have that principle all the way around, right? So even in that example, I think about that a lot. When Roe v. Wade fell in 2022, I was one of the first people in DC to like go out and be in front of the Supreme Court, along with an organization I work with, Harriet's Wildest Dreams. And there were so many Black women, trans men, who were out there on the front lines talking about the importance of abortion access. It's white women who are who are the face, really, of the pro choice movement. And it is also white women who vote disproportionately for Donald Trump. It is also white women who vote disproportionately for Republicans. It is also white women who uphold Christio-fascist ideals and are the culture keepers of white supremacy, because culture influences politics. So if you are the people that are continuously cultivating the culture, then you cannot say that you are in true allyship with Black people, with Black women, with trans women. And so I feel like I went into a different loop, but I guess I said all that to say that as we continue to think about the future of feminism in this new, like this very new landscape that we're in, Roe v. Wade is fell, we're seeing criminalizations of abortions all up and down the South and in some of these red states in the Midwest. And women are dying. People are dying because they cannot get access to abortion care. They cannot get access to medical care. So we have to do something about that. And whether it is women getting their IVF taken from them, white, Black, or different, baby, that affects all of us. Whether it is women getting our access to birth control at all taken from them, I'm sure white women get cis too, not as much as Black women do, but I'm sure y'all get cis and bad periods. So if you can't get access to your birth control, what does that mean? And so again, it comes back to this idea of, if white women want to be in true allyship, if they want to acknowledge and interact with the intersecting identities that exist within a womanist movement, then that means that they have to actively divest from a culture of white supremacy. They have to actively divest from whatever financial holdings a lot of y'all may have, because a lot of y'all's money is slave money. Let's just be real. Let's just be honest. Whatever holdings you may have, you might want to divest those as well. Because these next couple of steps of the falling of the American empire is going to be directly targeting the financial and the war power. And if we are not doing that, we are not actually targeting white supremacy, period. So, hopefully that answers the question.
It definitely does, and then some. Well, and I mean, you touched on a lot, and there's like so many different threads and pathways I could go. But yeah, and I think, just like there's the example of DEI or affirmative action. It's like the people who are the highest recipients of that are white women, and they're also the biggest critics of affirmative action. So, yeah, there's a lot of, like, blindness, and you could say, "Oh, well, that's right-wing women," but it's really not. I think that, neoliberalism and fascism hold hands a lot more than anything holds hands with leftism, and with that, I wanna get into another intersection, which is, LGBTQ, and I think that, so there's a book that just came out, that by Sophie Lewis, that talks about, enemy feminism, TERFs, police women, and girl bosses against liberation, and in her book, she writes about how where am I? Sorry. Um the the biggest reason for, and she's British, so she's talking about the UK, but the biggest reason for British feminism's transphobia is empire. Why? Because gatekeeping white womanhood requires a commitment to purity, and in a moment when attacks against our trans siblings are escalating, it's clear that this desire for purity indexes a larger drive for fascism. So while feminism is necessarily central to any meaningful anti-fascism, it does not mean that it is always anti-fascist or even non-fascist. And you can talk about this not just against trans folks, but against any folks in that queer community. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, how feminism has kind of also become, whether that's trad wives or whatever, but like this sort of turf and anti-trans, anti-queer movement alongside fascism.
I would say that because the white supremacy is now becoming multiracial, because the fascism in this country is now becoming multiracial, this isn't just an issue with white women, right? As a black woman who knows the conservative, nature of my community, it is also black women in this country. It is also other women that are mostly centering conservative religion, conservative religious views, that are also attacking trans women and trans people, who are also trying to separate themselves from transness. And I have to remind my sisters, I have to let y'all know that black women get killed because they think we're trans too. Because of the ideal idea, if the ideal form of feminism, if the ideal the most feminine woman you could be is a blonde hair, blue eyed, thin, able bodied white woman, then you have to imagine that white supremacy contracts, because right now, the idea of whiteness, the system of whiteness is contracting. A lot of them folks that was considered white, the white Argentinians and all them other folks, y'all ain't white no more, child. So whiteness is literally shrinking back to itself as fascism and authoritarianism ramp up, right? And you don't think that white women who are a little fat are gonna get caught up in that? You don't think that black women, period, are gonna get caught up in that? You don't think that anybody who does not fit into that ideal, um, woman like stereotype of what the most feminine and demure woman is, you don't think that you're gonna get caught up in some of this anti-trans hate, some of this anti-trans legislation? You're wrong. There's already been tall women that get misgendered all the time, no matter what your race is. Baby, you got a little bit of a deep voice. They coming after you too. If you are a woman who just prefers to wear pants, I promise you. And that's the thing about it. It's like it seems sometimes so ridiculous. I think even now, like the time that we're in, if you had have told me in 2016 at the peak of my radicalization, like my political radicalization, and really when I started to like tap into politics for real, that this is where we would be in 10 years, I probably would have laughed. Like I would have for sure laughed, because it seems so ridiculous that we would have a billionaire baby actually being our shadow president and ripping our federal government to shreds, and everyone's acting like it's business as usual. You could not have told me that that would be the case, I would have laughed at you. But white supremacy is ridiculous. White supremacy, the idea of white men sitting around a table 250 years ago and saying, we are going to create a country, and thinking that there are thousands of compounded ideas, there are thousands of years of work. I mean, there are thousands of, you know, thoughts and meetings and all the different things that they did to create this society. They would have never in a million years imagined that I would be talking to you on a thin piece of pink plastic over this invisible Wi-Fi they can't see. Like, it's so ridiculous to think what this system could have turned into. And so we have to think about some of the most ridiculous parts of our culture. Some of the most ridiculous ways that we show up are potentially going to be criminalized because of the contraction of whiteness and authoritarianism that we are currently experiencing. Like, it's a little funny, but it's also like, girl, it's terrifying. It's really terrifying. And the ways in which our young men are being targeted, and the ways in which our young women are perpetuating and upholding patriarchy in and of themselves, we are going down a very dangerous path. And so it's not just trans women, lesbian women, it's not just bi people, it's not just gay people that are going to be affected. It is going to be more and more people that just do not fit in the ideal um version of what whiteness wants to be respectable and acceptable. Um so yeah.
Yes. Amen. Amen. Well, and you mentioned men as well, and one of the things that I wanted to bring up was Bell Hooks wrote in The Will to Change, which is one of my favorite books, about how feminism has done a really poor job of including and analyzing how patriarchy affects men and how it destroys what men could be in aid of what the system demands them to be, like angry patriarchs that are emotionally stunted and perpetuate systemic violence. And it's to a point where I think if we're not talking about the patriarchy and how it affects all genders, then we're not really talking about the patriarchy, right? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how feminism, or whatever we want to call it, how this also needs to include an analysis of men and include men actively.
Yeah. For this, like, a personal anecdote. I grew up, first of all, my father, very absent. Okay. My biological father, don't really know him. My stepfather, very abusive, like abusive, alcoholic. And also, like, I was a victim of sexual assault at a very young age. So my perception of men, my relationship with men, and my empathy for men was very low for a very long time. And 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 I in a way that's justified, you know. And also, as we think about how inclusivity is the only solution to a culture of exclusion, to a culture of hatred, to a culture of divisiveness. When we think about the fact that we do literally have to love each other into liberation, I had to come to terms with the fact that I would be in movement spaces, being all for the girls, but very much like shitting on my male and, like, men presenting masculine energy folks. And it's really hard to build that way. It's really hard to build without balance. And I think as we continue to examine, number one, how patriarchy oppresses men as well, especially gay men, effeminate men, disabled men, men that don't fit into society's standards of masculinity or being able to provide in a society where poverty is literally a policy choice. Patriarchy does oppress men as well. While it does benefit them, it only benefits, again, those men who actually have access to the peaks of whiteness. We have to remember that all of these things are the sons and daughters of whiteness, of white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, all these things, sexism, all these things are products of white supremacy. So when we think about how in a society where being a man means being, I don't know, physically fit, being a provider, making six figures. What else do they be seeing on the little manosphere podcast channel? The men that don't need to have them stupid podcast mics. But like all the manosphere red pill shit, like all those things. And how many men just simply don't fit that? They're just not that. Um, and also how as women, again, because we are the culture keepers, Black women are raising these very misogynistic, very patriarchal Black men. And it's because these Black women have also been indoctrinated with misogynistic and patriarchal thought. White women, again, are the culture keepers of white supremacy. They are passing down the traditions of white supremacy. So that means that there's a certain sacrifice that they have to make as within their own humanity. And as we continue to uphold these systems that only serve to divide us, that only serve to oppress us, that only serve to literally commodify every single ounce of our humanity until there's nothing left, we have to think about how we can love each other radically, not being self-sacrificing, mind you, not in a way that makes excuses for men or makes excuses for patriarchy, but that provides safe spaces for men to be masculine in a way that is not harmful. Because masculinity is not the problem. Being a protector and a provider and doing all the things, being 6'4", whatever it is, that's not the issue. You feel me? Being physically fit or not physically fit based on ability is not the issue, but being able to be masculine and be in community and be loving and also have empathy and also be able to have connection, not only with women in a romantic sense, but in a platonic sense, not only with men in a platonic sense, but to be able to like really have empathy for men. Because I think a lot of what patriarchy serves to do is dehumanize people. And it's not only dehumanizing to women, of course it's dehumanizing to women. We know all the different ways that patriarchy oppresses and dehumanizes us, but it also serves to dehumanize what it means to be masculine in this society. It strips all of the ability to connect without being ridiculed. It strips all of the ability to have empathy without being ridiculed. It strips any ability to be vulnerable without being ridiculed. And as a society, we have to interrogate ourselves as individuals, how, again, the same ways that we are upholding white supremacy, the same ways we are upholding American ideals of exceptionalism, and we are oppressing people that are outside of our borders. It's the same way that we have to examine how we're upholding patriarchy in our everyday lives. And what we can do also to make sure that we are actively deconstructing patriarchy, whether that is allowing your male friend to cry, on just giving him the space. It's really simple shit. Giving people the space to cry and to be human. Giving your male friend, say that you're out here with your guys, with your homeboys, you know what I'm saying? And one of these niggas want to talk about, the state of the world. They want to talk about their fears. They want to talk about their anxieties. Just allowing people the space and allowing yourself the space to be connected with. And yeah, like the more I kind of realized that, the more I was able to create real connections with the men that I'm in space with. And also not see them as just objects of destruction or even of like sex objects. Cause like I have a fucked up relationship with sex as well. I have a bad relationship with sex as well. So, and we're all trying to heal. We're all trying to like figure that stuff out. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so spot on, and, like, I so feel that with I think the first time that a guy, like, in my band broke down and started crying, my initial reaction was like, "Oh, your life is hard? Like, really?" And I realized that that was based on my really messed up relationship with men, and that I felt like they didn't have the right to cry or to feel vulnerable considering how much pain that they had inflicted on me. But of course, that's not his fault. And the only way that we can address that is to, like you said, allow them that space. And that requires a lot of work on our part too. And yeah, I mean, there's again so much to pull from. We recently had on the show Kamau Franklin, who talked about that, white rage is okay, and rage that's white rage, whether that be actually white men or kind of white supremacist rage that seeks to perpetuate the system, is a-okay. But any kind of rage in a black body or any kind of rage that is aimed at the system is totally condemned and called savage and all of that. And that really speaks to that sort of white supremacist patriarchal paradigm as well. And we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to get to the international aspect of it because it is called International Women's Day. And I wanted to talk about that international aspect and what legitimate international solidarity looks like, particularly when we look at the amount of harm that the U.S. empire does, and how women, whether they be in Palestine or Venezuela or Sudan or Congo, are just not important to U.S. empire, but we're still feminist, right? Could you talk a little bit about the international aspect of that and what real solidarity would look like across borders?
Absolutely. I mean, we watched 15 months of pregnant Palestinian women having their babies without anesthesia, getting C-sections. And we also watched them lose their children almost immediately after. There were so many different babies that were stillborn that I saw on my timeline. Just the amount of stress that one has to be enduring, like under a genocide, being unhoused under a genocide. Um, I think we really forget that. We forget about the Sudanese women whose children are starving, who are starving themselves. And we forget about, even though we can say what we want about USAID being a CIA money laundering scheme, and yes, it does contribute to the, USA soft power of it all, like legitimizing the presence of the United States of America in certain countries. I can hold that while also holding that there are HIV clinics in South Africa that are closing right now that South African women were benefiting from. That South African women, now that they were getting their antivirals there, where are they gonna get them from now? We are directly responsible for the oppression of people outside of our borders because our labor as Americans funds American empire. Every single day when you wake up, you get in your car, you go to work, you clock in, you pay your taxes at the end of your 2 weeks. You are consenting you are consenting to your tax dollars going to the oppression of people outside of our borders. Afghani women have had their country destroyed for 20 years. They're now being oppressed by the Taliban. We can say what we want. Certain groups being funded by who and what weapons might have been left by where by who for what. You know what I'm saying? But right now, this is a very real thing. Girls are being taken out of schools. And so what does it look like to have a global politic, number one, to that looks at and seeks to destroy the US empire because the empire is truly the root of all evil, but also to repair some of the damage that has been done as well. Um, because it's not enough to say that, you support Palestinian liberation. It's not enough to say ceasefire now. Do you support a Palestinian right to return? That's what we really need to know. It's not enough to say that you gonna stop buying these phones from iPhone and stuff like that. But like, how else are you gonna actively divest from the U.S. system? How are you gonna actively divest from Amazon, who is also a part of oppressing the Congo? How are you like just again like examining what conveniences we feel like we need, what are requirements, what are preferences, and what are just traditions that we have been passed down and have normalized? What are these things? What are we actually asking of ourselves and of our humanity? What do you actually need? And I feel like we have been conditioned as Americans to just have all the things that we want, and that is a part of the American conditioning. For us to feel that we're so exceptional, we're so amazing, we're just so much better than everybody else, that we deserve all these things on their backs, on their bones. Um, and that's not right because as we see, the crimes of the empire always come home. And Audre Lorde and the Combahee River Collective put it so beautifully in their statement when they said that being working class is also an intersection of oppression. If you are a working class person in this country, if you are a working class woman in this country, if you're a working class Black woman in this country, you are being oppressed by this country, and you are also actively contributing to the oppression of people outside of our borders. It's too like we have to be able to understand that because we're being oppressed by this country, we must destroy this empire and that we must build something that does not oppress others in the future. We have to be very intentional about what we are for and how we show up in these coming decades, in these coming generations. Um, and just really just examining how we are operating in our Americanness every single day.
Well, I think that's beautifully put, and I would say something, but I think I'd ruin it if I did, so I'm just gonna leave it right there. Afeni, thank you so much for coming on the show, and as you do, spitting some facts and fire. Where can folks follow, your radical work?
Yeah, find me on all the things at Facts and Fire. Um, yeah, that's pretty much all I do right now is the social medias. I do organize in real life, so you can catch me outside if you want to do that. Um, but if you catch me outside and you run up on me kind of weird, I might fight you. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah,
Yes,
no.
don't run at Afeni. Walk slowly, say hello, use your words. Thank you so much, Afeni. That was awesome.